Hey guys, DMS3TV here. Today I have for you the Beyerdynamic DT1990, a professional studio headphone with an audiophile appeal. So do these crush the competition, or will we be blinded by brightness? Let's find out. So starting off the build, it's metal and leather and velour everywhere. I'm not kidding. Now these are light, don't get me wrong, but this is metal, this is metal, this is metal, this is metal, this is metal. Everything I can find on here is metal. I don't see any plastic except for the pad rings that hold the actual pads on. Yet somehow Beyerdynamic managed to make them relatively light. Not quite as light as HD600s, but pretty close. And not only that, they added plenty of padding. The only time I ever have an issue with them is after about 2.5 to 3 hours of use, I get a little bit of a hot spot right here in the middle on top of my head. Now, while these pads are round instead of oval shaped, they don't seem to touch my ears in anywhere uncomfortable. And these pads are interchangeable with another set of pads that come with them. These are the balance pads. They also come with analytical pads, but we'll talk to those once we get into sound. The mechanism on the side, which allows for a little bit of swiveling and for vertical movement to adjust, is relatively tight, though not too difficult. From what I've seen with other Beyers like the T1, these tend to loosen up as time goes on. And these have a single input on one side, which some people may not like, but it's generally a good idea for studio use. And speaking of that, they have two cables, a long one and a short one, and the shorter one is like those twisty telephone cords that you can extend out if you need it, which I personally am a fan of. And I haven't once gotten it tangled up in itself. Of course, both these are terminated with a screw-on 1/4" adapter, and they come with a insanely hard carrying case. So I would easily give these a 9 out of 10 on build and a 7 out of 10 on comfort. Now let's talk sound. These are 250 ohm dynamic headphones, so you could run them on a tube amp if you want. And you may want to, depending on how you like your sound signature. Out of the box, these don't sound bright, they don't sound warm, they don't sound to be particularly anything outgoing. In fact, they just sound extremely detailed, and honestly, they sounded very level. Now, this did change a little bit as I started to get into it. Looking at our frequency response, we can see that with the balance pads, which is the green line by the way, they are a little bit warm, have a relatively large dip in the mids at 4.5K and then spike back up at 8K. Now here's the crazy thing. I generally trust frequency response for a lot of things, but for some reason, I feel like the frequency response that I'm measuring doesn't reflect how these actually sound, because this frequency response would lead you to believe that they're lacking in mid-range and have very bright highs. The original DT990, for example. But the 1990, they don't sound anything like they measure. In fact, the highs aren't piercing or uncomfortable in any way, even when A-Bing them with the slightly dark and veiled HD650. Now, when A-Bing next to HD650, I did notice a little bit of a dip in the mid-range on these, which I wouldn't have noticed unless I'd compare them to 600 or 650. Doesn't sound nearly as big as it measures still. And it absolutely perplexes me because listening to these, just listening to them without doing any measurements, I would call these one of the best headphones I've ever heard, especially for studio use. These are off the wall insane for studio use. I wish I had a set of these when I had a studio. And honestly, I wish I was keeping these, because I would daily drive these. Bass extension for a dynamic is absolutely phenomenal. Soundstage is focused but spacious. I wouldn't call it particularly wide, but I would say that it sounds very, very accurate, which is the point of these. This is marketed as a professional headphone. And in every respect of that, it is probably the best professional headphone that I've put my hands on to date. And that does include the HD800, which is another diffuse field headphone. Side by side, if I was picking between the DT1990 Pro and the HD800 or HD800S, I would take the DT1990 Pro for either professional use or for personal listening. And I think the key when looking at every aspect of these, soundstage, dynamics, I think the key when looking at these headphones and trying to analyze their soundstage, dynamics, transients, anything across the board is balance. Because these sound incredibly balanced in all respects. The sound is incredibly tight, it is incredibly detailed, it is incredibly accurate. And I mean it when I say I would change absolutely nothing about the sound of the DT1990 Pro. I enjoy this far more than the regular DT990, and I definitely enjoy it a lot more than the Tesla T1. I feel like in a perfect setup, I would own these, LCD2s, and HD650s all three, And with that, I feel like I could cover all the bases and be perfectly happy. Now let's get down to amps. These are going to respond incredibly well with a fast amp. So once again, I'm going to recommend the NFB11 like I almost always do, NFB or R2R11. However, I feel like these could scale much higher than that into things like the NFB1 amp or a Dynalo or maybe a high-end tube amp if you want something to level out the highs a little bit more. But my point is that I don't think any cheap amp, and by cheap amp, I mean an amp under, say, maybe $300, I don't think that's going to do these justice. And after what I've heard, you are going to be reaching pretty high up before you are hearing the full capability of these headphones. Now that being said, I did try them on a big variety of things, all the way from my laptop's headphone out, a Fulla 2, a Magni 3, a Little Dot Mark II, all kinds of things. And they still sounded great no matter what I plugged them into, but I definitely noticed that they scale quite a bit. But even just plugged into my phone or my laptop, they sounded better than most headphones I've heard, period. So much to the point that one day, these might even replace my daily driver HD650s. So guys, I really hope you liked this video. If you did, please leave a like down below. As always, the headphones will be linked in the description as well as all the camera gear I use for this video. And if you want a way to support the channel, please check out the Patreon link to the video description. And until then, I will see you guys next time. Peace.